I want to read you a file memo which I wrote. It says, I spoke this afternoon with Terry Gilliam with respect to Brazil. I told Mr. Gilliam that I had seen his last version of the film, and although I felt the shortening and other editing changes constituted an improvement, I nonetheless thought that the film had major problems and required substantial additional work. Mr. Gilliam told me that this was his final version of the film, and that the film had been received well by various Americans to whom he had shown the film both in England and the United States. Additionally, he indicated that, quote, many people at Universal shared his excitement about the film. By the way, these many people are never named. They are the nameless hordes. I indicated to Mr. Gilliam that notwithstanding his, quote, commitment to his film, the fact remained that a prior preview of the original film indicated a very poor reception from the audience, and that I felt my responsibilities precluded our releasing a film that had been so poorly received by an audience without attempting to improve the film from an audience point of view. I invited his participation in such changes as we had in mind. Mr. Gilliam indicated he certainly did not want to be a party to this, and that I would be the recipient of a war, in quotes, which would be more unpleasant than releasing the film in his version.
Reply, quoting reference 319 Mayday. Attention, Sidney Sheinberg. Dear Sid, once upon a time you told me that you were not the one that put me in the chair at the end of Brazil. I'm afraid that is no longer true, unable as I am to think of anyone else who is directly responsible for my current condition. Your later offer to be the friend who becomes a torturer has more than come true. I'm not sure you are aware of just how much pain you are inflicting, but I don't believe responsibility to the company in any way absolves you from crimes against even this small branch of humanity. As long as my name is on the film, what is done to it is done to me. There's no way of separating these two entities. I feel every cut, especially the ones that sever the balls. And I plead, whether they are done in the name of legitimate and responsible experiments or personal curiosity, if you really wish to make your version of Brazil, then put your name on it. Then you can do what you like. Sid Sheinberg's Brazil has a nice ring to it, but until that time, I shall continue both to decline and also to decline. Please let me know how much longer must I endure before the bleeding stops. Deterioratingly yours, Terry. C.C. Jack Lind.
In July 1985, when Europeans were seeing this image of Sam Lowry about to be tortured by his friend Jack Lint, the scene had special meaning for Terry Gilliam. Terry was told that the 2-hour and 22-minute version of Brazil, released internationally by Fox, was too long, too confusing, and too downbeat for American audiences. What followed was one of the noisiest, most unusual, and most instructive confrontations between a filmmaker and a studio in Hollywood history. Noisy because the best parts of the battle were fought in public view, unusual in that the filmmaker won, and instructive in what it taught us about the way Hollywood works and the way critics think. Hi, I'm Jack Matthews, film critic for Newsday and co-host of the syndicated television show Cinema. In 1985, I was a film columnist for the Los Angeles Times, and through my coverage of the Brazil saga, I became a part of it. My column became the battleground where shots were fired from both sides and where producer Arnon Milchan carried on negotiations for an attempted buyback of the movie. There was no secret where I stood. I loved Brazil almost as much as I loved writing about it. And the beauty of the story was that both sides were completely open to me. In fact, they were talking to each other most of the time through my column. My job was to treat everybody fairly enough that I could get the whole story. And it all began years earlier in the depressed coal town of Port Talbot, Wales.
I hope this is true. I've at least begun to believe it's true, that the idea originated when I was looking for locations for Jabberwocky or Holy Grail, one of those two films. And we were in Wales, and Port Talbot is a steel town that has fallen on hard times. And I was out on the beach in the evening, and it's the most dismal place in the world because there's these great jetties and conveyor belts that carried the coal from the ships up to the steel plants. And all this coal dust had spread over everything. So everything had this wash of blackness over it, and it was ugly, and it was gray. And the sun was setting, and it was a beautiful sunset. And I just had this image of somebody sitting on this beach with a radio and this beautiful sunset, obviously trying to escape from this bleak world of his and picking up on the radio this song.
While these ideas were percolating on the back burner, Gilliam was busy making Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Time Bandits, and the short film that became the prologue to Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. It wasn't until he met the hard-charging Israeli producer Arnon Milchan, who'd just done The King of Comedy with Martin Scorsese, that Brazil moved forward.
When I first met Arnon, it was in Paris. I was on my way somewhere. And yes, I met in a restaurant, because he at that time was producing the stage production of Amadeus with Roman Polanski in it. And Arnon is an effectively charming person. And to wander into this fabulous restaurant in Paris, and there's Polanski and the whole glittery world there, I was easily seduced. And Arnon is a very seductive character, and he's great. And he's, at that point in Hollywood, people were saying, don't get involved with the man. The man's a pirate, the man's a crook and a buccaneer. And I like that, because that was what I wanted to be as well. I wanted to be raping and pillaging my way around the Hollywood system. And Arnon was doing that, and we got on very well. And I like the sense of adventure with him.
Oh my God, this is Terry Gilliam. You know me, I'm like a starstruck only with directors. And somebody say, oh yeah, you know, anyway, Roman within a few minutes got distracted by other things, guess what? And I got introduced to Terry, and he said, oh, you did The King of Comedy, well, I can't believe it. And I said, I can't believe you did Holy Grail and Time Bandit, and we couldn't believe this. By the time, and we kept talking, and somehow I think we finished a bottle of wine, or 2 or 3, and he started to tell me about that movie. And all I remember was watching his body language, and the only thing I remember him describing to me this scene that actually didn't end up in the movie, with the eyeballs, how these eyeballs keep watching somebody in the sky, and he described this vision that he has of wherever you go, you're being watched.
The way I tell stories, people say, huh? Because I usually tell stories in all the wrong order. It's I'm halfway through it and realize that I haven't given them a key bit of information from the beginning, but I do it with such sort of energy and you know, bah, 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 and they think something's happening, but it's not. It's just a lot of noise. And it's but then when I calm down, they see I'm reasonably intelligent and seem to be aware of what I'm doing. It's all an illusion.
I said, I wish I could be involved in this movie. And he came back from the bathroom, which was a phone call, and apparently we made a deal, which he didn't remember, I think, and I didn't remember exactly. In the next day, I know we told our lawyers we made some kind of a deal. I made a commitment to a movie I never read before, never heard, and definitely couldn't describe. And he made the commitment to a guy, I don't think he even knew how to spell my name. So that's what I remember.
The feeling was very, very immediate that, yeah, let's do it. That was the sense of it. And that's what I liked about it. And I'm very vague about things, the details of when and where, because it's just, yeah, let's do it. This is great. Here we go. And he put the money in. Tom Stoppard excited him, you know, because he, you know, class playwright. And then we got to work on it. And it was a simple, that's the way I remember it. I remember it very simply. It may be more complex than that, but to me, it was just two people liking one another and saying, and one of them having money and the other having talent, let's do something.
Imagine somebody with a hangover trying to tell the story of Brazil without having read it, without knowing Terry. It's hard to tell it even after you saw the movie. Yeah, so yeah, I definitely was called crazy and suicidal.
Milchan financed the Tom Stoppard and Charles McEwen rewrites of Brazil and shopped them around Hollywood. It was rejected by every studio. The only bite he got was from 20th Century Fox, which offered to finance Brazil if Gilliam would first direct a science fiction project for them titled Enemy Mine. Though it would have paid him millions and launched him as an A-list director in Hollywood, Gilliam refused.
After everybody passed on Brazil, I was offered this project by Fox, which they said if I did that, we could then do Brazil. And in their wisdom, what had happened was a project that was in their mind an A project. It was the best project in town, best script. And And so clearly they had gone to the best directors, Spielberg and all, and they'd all passed. And eventually they got down to me, somewhere down the list. But if you're having the top project, you've always got to have the top director. So you're elevated so suddenly I'm elevated to top director status with top project. And when I turned it down, they were bemused, and they said, why? And I said, because I want to do this other film. So the other film now was elevated, because surely to turn down the top film by the top director turning down the top film for another film, the other film must be even better. And so these perceptions shift in Hollywood, and they came to Cannes with a different view of what the project was.
In May 1983, Terry and Arnon teamed up at the Cannes Film Festival, where Terry had gone to promote Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, and Milchan to make distribution deals for Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America, which was in production.
We were in Cannes, Arnon and I, running around the corridors behaving like idiots, which is really useful because they don't understand you when you behave like that, when you're not on your knees begging and groveling, when you're cavalier, we don't need your money. They start, well, come on, take some.
Somehow, Milchan started a bidding war for Brazil between Fox production chief Joe Wazan and Universal's Bob Ramey, both of whom had earlier passed on it.
I met with Terry. Terry had given me a script, and I read the script once here in the United States, in Los Angeles, and I liked the script, but I have to, frankly, you know, it was a complex script, and I knew that Terry would be bringing so much more to it than what was on that printed page. I wanted to meet with Terry and have him explain it to me, which we did in Cannes. He came to my suite in the Carlton Hotel, and we talked about the picture, and he spent several hours, and he took me through the script page by page. He told me the story.
The whole thing about Cannes is that you get executives out of their offices in LA and you bring them down to the south of France. The sun shines, there are beautiful women, there's lots of wine, great food, and they're vulnerable. That's the important thing about Cannes for me, is that they're now in our world, and we've sort of got them, we've dragged them out of their safe little worlds. And in the case of that year at Cannes, I mean, with The Meaning of Life, it really was a big success there. And I had done this silly opening that was not supposed to be the opening, but because it didn't fit in the film, we pulled it out of the film, but it doesn't matter. That's another story. There is a buzz. There's a buzz. You're hot. You're the person they want to talk to. And so we had these meetings, and I remember the people from Fox flew in, and they get very excited too, because they get to fly in on a jet, a private jet, so that makes you feel good. So everybody's feeling good, and they're feeling dynamic, and they want to do things and make choices. And you can almost say anything to them, I'm convinced, and they will fall for it. And I don't think they're hearing what you're really saying, to be honest, because they're taking in all this information, the peripheral information about the sun, the wine, the reception of one film, all that.
I don't think that created the sense of excitement or heat for this project. I don't remember it that way at all. I mean, my memory is that we wanted to be in business I wanted to be in business with Terry Gilliam, and I thought it was, and I liked Arnon Milchan. I thought he was a good producer. I thought this was an attractive deal from a deal point of view for Paramount. I meant Paramount for Universal, and I made the deal. It was, I think, $9 million for all U.S. rights. Based on the previous picture, Time Bandits, that was a slam dunk. That was an intelligent deal. And I liked Terry, and I liked this project. I liked his script, and we thought we could get some exciting casting. As you know, we got Jonathan Pryce and Bobby De Niro, and so it was a simple, straightforward piece of business for me. And I do believe there was some competition, but I don't remember that.
In my naive way of thinking about things was when Cannes finished, we had the money. In fact, Arnon knew better, because he knew that the minute they got back to Los Angeles, they would wake up and realize they'd been conned. And so we've done it, jumping up and down. He's zipping off to LA as fast as he can to get him to get the signature on the paper, because he knew how fragile the whole thing really was, how much of an illusion it was. And he managed to do that, and so, Fox ended up with The World, and Universal ended up with North America.
Wazan committed Fox to another $6 million for the international rights. In Brazil, the project no one wanted was underway with a $15 million budget. By the time the film was completed, there had been a changing of the guard at Universal. Bob Ramey was gone, leaving Frank Price in charge of the motion picture division, and Brazil, at least in the eyes of its creators, was an orphan.
I was told what it was, the storyline. I figured, well, that's something I really can't have any impact on at this point, so I turned my attention to other things.
Universal executives saw a rough cut of Brazil in the summer of 1984.
I thought it was a very good picture, but not commercial. I mean, Terry's a very gifted filmmaker. I mean, the sets and the effects were dazzling. And, it was when I saw it, I said, this is, it would probably make a very good art house release.
I didn't think it was a breakout movie, but I didn't see it as an art house film either. I mean, I was really basing the business decision, the financial decision, on the success of Time Bandits. I felt it had that kind of potential.
The first screening that I was really aware of having any major impact was at Universal. We took it out to Universal, and it was in the Alfred Hitchcock Theater, I believe it was. And there they all were, the boys, Sid and Frank, and was Lou there? He might have been there. There were a lot of people.
Antonowski's art house label definitely raised red flags at a studio that was not in the business of marketing specialty items. And when the lights came up at the first Universal screening of his movie, Terry knew he was in trouble.
And at the end of the film, I came in for the last 10 minutes, and I went up to the projection booth. I was looking down, and I saw, as the lights came up, the back of those necks, and I knew we were in big trouble. I mean, every muscle was knotted, every tendon, ligament was just, there was hatred written all over the back of those heads. And I knew we're in big, big trouble. And we came down, the sun's shining, and everybody comes out. And, everybody's non-committal, but you know what's going on. And Sid had this line, which apparently Arne and I took into totally different senses. And which was that, we'll have to sell this as the film of the decade, which I knew meant that we're in trouble here. He doesn't have a clue. You can only sell it as something extraordinary, but you got to sell it hard because nobody's going to go to see this thing unless you con them. And Arnon, on the other hand, thought it was a positive statement, that it was indeed the film of the decade. And
yeah, I thought it was the greatest thing I've ever heard. I thought that I heard it's the best movie of the decade. Terry thought he heard it's the biggest problem of the decade, and he was right. You know me, I hear only positive things.
And the next day we had a meeting at Universal, and I wasn't supposed to come along apparently, but Arnon got me to come along, and unfortunately I arrived on time. Arnon never arrives on time, and so I arrive, go into the Black Tower and announce myself, and there's a moment of embarrassment because I'm not supposed to be there. This is supposed to be a meeting of the men, the adults, not the kids. And it was a meeting in Frank Price's office, who was head of production then. And I remember going up there, and it was like being brought into the headmaster's office, that I had done a very, very bad thing.
No one else in that meeting remembers it as being quite as contentious as Terry does. But they were thinking as businessmen, not artists. And Frank Price's suggestion that the film be shortened got Terry's back up.
We knew that in the contract it said it was 2 hours and 15 minutes was what the length of the film was supposed to be. And I was coming in at 2 hours and 22 minutes. But yeah, come on, we're friends. What's a few minutes, 7 minutes. And I think Arnon was probably at the time pushing me to get it down, but I couldn't see how to get it down. And so we submitted it at 2 hours and 22.
That's one of those elementary things that if you're going, you want 2 screenings at night. Certainly if you have an adult film, it's an economic handicap to be able to only have 1 screening. So if you get too long, that's your problem. So anytime with a long film, you need to have that conversation.
Frank is a very Buddha-like man, a very hard to tell what he's thinking, except he's a smart, clever Machiavellian character with a rather benign smile. and he, had real problems with it and felt, well, it's clearly it's too long, Terry, and maybe really what I think a good place to cut this film would be when they finally go to bed together and they fly off into the sunset. Perfect. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy, boy. Everybody happy ending, and that would be a great way to end it, Terry. And I said, well, that would be a Frank Price film, not a Terry Gilliam film. And my name's on the credit at the moment. He didn't know how to take that.
2 days later, Brazil was previewed for an audience recruited from psychology and philosophy courses at nearby UCLA. The way Universal's marketing people saw it, the audience, if anything, was stacked in favor of the film. And according to them, it did not go well.
That's right, and that was a disaster. Well, I think there were walkouts and everything else. I mean, it was a picture you could only. It was a picture that I know from the beginning was a cult film. You get an audience in if you got reviews, but the general audience would never like this film. They wouldn't get it, and they wouldn't like it.
The problem is I knew it was a wonderful film because I'd been to France and seen it. I'd seen the reviews there. I'd been around Europe. I'd seen how it played. I knew it didn't play for everybody. I knew I'd seen the people walking out of the cinemas. I knew for a lot of people it was complete rubbish. It was offensive. It was irritating. It was an assault on their senses. It was kind of, I kept saying it was cinematic rape. We got them in there and then we get them into a dark corner and we beat the shit out of them in the movie. And so I knew it was all of those things. And I knew, on the other hand, that for others, it was just magic. It transported them. It said everything about the world that they felt. So I was a happy guy. I don't want to please everybody.
I remember talking about it after the screening, and I told him what I thought. So which is, in essence, what I've said here. It's a good movie, entertaining, but for a special audience, and that's the only way I knew to release it. And I think Sid's expectations went beyond that. He felt there was a highly commercial movie potentially there.
Sid's point of view is if you could take out the depressing aspects of the film, which was the last act, you'd have a commercial picture. I don't know that you ever would have had a commercial picture, but that's Sid's point of view: is shorten it, make it positive, and you'll have a commercial picture.
Which I looked at it and I thought, it is what it is, and it works very well that way. But let's not kid ourselves.
Frank, being a clever political man, knew he had a hot potato on his hands, and there was somebody with hands waiting to grab it, Mr. Sid Sheinberg.
Maybe one of the places that I should start is, why am I involved in this to begin with? Because one of the questions that he has asked rhetorically is, why is Sid Sheinberg doing all these terrible things to me? I had an instinct, which might or might not be right, that because the picture did have so much in it that I thought was good, that every effort should be made to try to make it as viable as we could. If I thought that it was a total piece of garbage, which I obviously did not think, certainly I wouldn't have volunteered to get involved to begin with, and I hope I wouldn't be as foolish as to have wasted not only my time, but my emotional energy on this subject. So I guess the candid answer, to be as self-examining as I can, is I think I must have believed, and I do believe, that things can be done vis-a-vis the length and possibly other things in connection with this picture that would make this picture more accessible. The term I kept using with Terry Gilliam really is accessible. He has his own recollection of things, some of which I wonder where he gets, but nonetheless, I have always believed that there is a picture that is brilliant in parts, that is too long, and that is, in essence, difficult to access for an audience.
Clearly the audience it was intended for didn't know what to make of it. So Sid was caught in the middle. And yet I think in his fatherly way felt he could take this young and obviously foolish filmmaker and whip him into shape and take what was clearly fantastic material and blend it into something that could be a wonderful and great and commercially successful film. And again, when he didn't understand that he wasn't part of the creative process.
Terry, emotionally exhausted, returned to London with instructions to cut the film further.
I'm not going to make a film unless I've got total control of it. That's why I do so few, I guess. And this, I had a final cut, which always makes it more difficult to get films off the ground because studios don't like to give up any power. But I had final cut, so I made the film. And what became interesting at the end and one thing we should actually say is the film had come out in Europe. Fox had accepted the film at 2 hours and 22 minutes as we made it, no problem, and it had gone out. And it was in the States where the time limit thing became, it was the stick they could hit us with. It was the one thing they could do. So that's why I cut it down. But even then, they wouldn't accept it, and they were delaying, they were doing everything. And Arnon was getting more and more panicky about not getting the money. And so eventually, he came to me, and I don't know why I was in Paris, but I was there, and he came and with this piece of paper, which was just a face-saving piece of paper. It really didn't mean, I mean, it said things, but it didn't really mean them, because this was just face-saving for everybody, which was basically that I gave up my final cut. I gave up my rights on the film. And that would then, he would get the money, and then they would basically lose the piece of paper, and everybody would be happy. And of course, that isn't what happened.
Had Arnon not been so anxious for the second payment, Terry could have still cut and delivered a version below 2 hours and 5 minutes, and the studio, as Sid acknowledged, would have had no options.
Now, I think if there is one thing that the record should show, above all things that are likely to be said in connection with this tedious subject, had Mr. Gilliam cut this picture and reduced it to 2 hours and 5 minutes and delivered it, that would have been the end of the matter. Now, Mr. Gilliam goes on and on and on about Sid Sheinberg doesn't like the length. I mean, doesn't like the ending. He'd like the ending change. There are other things he doesn't like. The fact of the matter is that had he shortened it, even late in the game, prior to this amendment, we would have had no alternative. But whether we liked it or didn't like it, but to pay the money and release the picture, because he would have complied with the condition of length.
The 2 hour and 11-minute version that Terry edited with the cumulus fade-out suggested by Sheinberg was also rejected. And the studio's lawyers informed the filmmakers that Universal was invoking its right to assume control of Brazil.
It all ended in having to send a lot out to L.A., where a team of editors working, I guess, under the supervision of Sid, were recreating Brazil. And they had decided that the theme of the film was Love Conquers All, which is the first I had realized that's what we had made, but it was nice, you know. And they started to work on this thing. And I don't know where it was going. And I would get calls from the editor occasionally wanting my input. I said, what do you mean you want my input? You know, but we're saving your film. No, you're killing my film. You're destroying it. You've taken the child and you're asking which limb do you want chopped off? His right leg, his left leg? Come on. And that's what you're asking me. You're not asking. And he was shocked. He couldn't understand that I wouldn't cooperate in every possible way to get that film out. And I said, no, but we made the film. There it is. You got what we made. That's it. There's nothing more, nothing less. That's the thing. And after a couple of those phone calls, I mean, I didn't take the calls anymore, but he was shocked that I could be so uncaring about my work. I mean, that's how they read it. That's what's wonderful, that I'm the irresponsible one. I'm the one that doesn't care. I'm the one that's walking away from my responsibilities as the creator of this thing. I mean, Sid, what was interesting in all of this, they all use those words like responsibility and I mean, to be honest, at the time I remember my vocabulary was reduced to nothing because all the important words, all the words about artistry, responsibility, honesty, creative, activity, audience, storytelling. They had taken all these words, and I was left with nothing but fuck, shit, piss. And so that was all the vocabulary I was left with, which I used. Fuck you, shit, piss. And they could use responsibility. They could talk in serious tones and sound like they were the ones who really, really cared about Brazil and the audience.
In August, the filmmakers committed their first flagrant contract violation by showing the American cut to audiences at the American Film Festival in Deauville, France.
I want to show you this article because, in point of fact, that really was what I would characterize as the first public indication, at least that I can recall, of this set of guerrilla tactics that he has engaged in. There's an article that appeared in the September 25th issue of Weekly Variety, and it says, Director Terry Gilliam and producer Arnon Milsham declare they're going to do everything in their power to foil intentions by Universal to trim and recut their futuristic black comedy, Brazil, for U.S. release.
I mean, the important thing in all of this was to not do battle on their ground, to not use their weapons. And so by going public, it was quite interesting to take out, to be quoted, Arnon saying, we'll fly any legitimate journalist to Europe or bust them to Mexico where they can see it. I mean, and then Universal were behaving so strangely. They took out this embargo because at one point we wanted to have a screening in New York for some PR people, to try to get some PR people that might help us in a campaign. And Universal got wind of this and said, no, all screenings of the film in America are under our jurisdiction and you can't do it.
On October 2nd, Daily Variety carried a full-page ad placed by Terry challenging not only the studio, but Sid Sheinberg directly.
I remember calling the next day, calling up Variety and said, I want to take out this ad. I want a full-page ad, and I want it bordered in a black border on it like a funeral announcement, an obituary, and then in the middle in just simple type, with a lot of white space around, just, Dear Sid Sheinberg, when are you going to release my film Brazil? Signed, Terry Gilliam. And I think it cost me $1,500 or £1,500, I can't remember, it was something. And they did it. And then you forget about it. And then a week later it comes out and you go blithely down to the newsagent and you get the thing and you open it up and you realize you've just damned yourself forever in Hollywood. Because, it was just, I was stunned by it. I was shocked as much as everybody else was, I'm sure, because I suddenly realized what I had done. And it was, because there it was, the front page is all typed, $10 billion in the first second, $30 million in the second. Money, 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 money. And you go page after page of money and success. And then you come to this very naked human question. And it was a stunner.
I have told them on many occasions, I just told you about, I read you a piece of communication with Mr. Gilliam where I've in effect said, I don't want to make anybody's life miserable. If this picture is so wonderful and in its present form, and maybe you'd like to make it longer, get somebody else to buy it. We'll take a loss on it.
No, through all of this, what was interesting is that it was clearly building up, especially in the big cities, a sense of this thing. Because I was going on, Good Morning America with Maria Shriver and with Joel Siegel, with De Niro. Again, this is where a sense of honor is at work here, because Bobby, who doesn't promote his own films, knew he could be helpful, and despite the fact that the last thing he wants to do is go on and be interviewed, or nationally, he came on. And that was how we got on the shows, because we were offering them an interview with Robert De Niro and his buddy Terry. and so we go on there, and Bobby, says 2 words, maybe it was 3, I can't remember. It was talkative that day. I think we might have even got to 4. And it's and there's me, and Maria Shriver saying, I hear you have a problem with the studio. I said, I don't have a problem with the studio. I have a problem with one man. His name is Sid Sheinberg, and he looks like this. And I pulled out an 8x10 glossy and pointed on national television. Now, that kind of, bizarre, clown-like, weird behavior, must have driven Sid mad, because it was everything he hated and feared and couldn't comprehend and couldn't deal with. And that was the only thing I felt I could do, is to make this whole battle as personal as possible, not make it about corporate responsibility and gray men and faceless things. It was mano a mano. It was the little artistic David against the great guy who sat in the office called Sid.
I'm a human being, and therefore I don't enjoy this. But I think what hurts me at a deep level is I think I have given too much of myself to the idea of good working relationships with directors. I don't think there's anyone in this industry who has given more. There may be others who have given as much, and I don't deserve this from Mr. Gilliam.
To be fair to Sid, it was an unfair fight, because everybody's heart is going to go out to the little guy who's struggling against the system. So we had that in our favor. And again, this is all part of the irony of Brazil, is that the battle for Brazil was exactly what the film was about. Everything, the making of the film, the battles afterwards, all are of a piece. They're all one thing.
You know, Mr. Gilliam has somehow now found himself identifying. It's rather interesting. He even distorts his own film. He now identifies his film as being about some kind of conglomerate or some kind of company which he says is Universal. Here's a picture where my film's about Universal. You know, even that is not true. His film is about a government and about government dehumanization. There are basically three elements in his version of his film. One is this soul who feels himself oppressed and lives in his world of fantasy. I don't know if you've seen this picture. The other is the element of the state, and the third are these terrorists. And although I believe that he may have started off identifying himself with the oppressed, I mean, I think that character is a surrogate for Terry Gilliam. I think at this point of the game, he has now relegated himself to being a terrorist. And I don't want to get more emotional or more colorful than the circumstance requires, because we're not talking about life and death here, we're talking about a film. But he said on the, he not only threatened me with, quote, war, which is kind of a hostile phrase, war, mind you, not lawsuits, war. In Rona Barrett the other night, he is quoted as saying that things are going to get very noisy at Universal. What the hell does he mean by that?
In the midst of the whole battle as it was going on, I remember I'd been invited to USC. They'd asked me to come out there at any time and give a talk. And so I thought, well, let's do it. Take advantage of this and bring out some audio-visual aids in the shape of a film. And I thought, this is the way to do it. We'll show Brazil to a bunch of students.
More than 300 students in the late Arthur Knight's film class at the University of Southern California were in the Norris Theater on October 18th when Gilliam appeared for a private, unauthorized screening of Brazil. There was just one small problem. The students had posted announcements all over campus days before.
And we get there, and we got a problem, because the guy who's in charge of the physical plant, the projector, said, we can't show this film because we got a call from Universal, and we can't do it. And I don't even know if they had a call from Universal, but the thing is, USC Film School is subsidized by the studios, and they don't want to do anything that might jeopardize their subsidy. It's the thing, it's a constant thing. Every time I go out to LA, you realize this is a city living in fear. Everybody is fearful of losing their little bit of the pie. And the guy said, we can't show it. I said, what do you mean you can't show it? I've come here all the way from London, England, in Europe, and this is part of my talk. And so it became a big, no, I'm not going to do this. And so I got onto my lawyer, and he said, can you contact the Universal lawyer and see if we can solve this?
I was there that day, and it was like a political rally from the 60s. For more than an hour, Terry divided his time between taking calls from his lawyer, who was negotiating with Universal's lawyers, and then reporting the conversations back to the delighted students.
I'm down with Arthur Knight on the stage with the students, talking about filmmaking and films, Brazil in particular, and every few minutes I'd be called out to take a phone call. I said, this is, to the students, this is what really filmmaking is about. It's not about camera angles, not about lenses, and not about film stock. It's about this. We spend most of our energy running up and down dealing with people in studios and legal people, and the battle went back and forth, and eventually my lawyer got the Universal lawyer to concede that we could show clips of the film. And so I thought, boom, go to the man who's in charge. Wouldn't have anything to do it. Even then, and by this time, I'm saying, it's Germany. We're in Germany. There's 6 million Jews dying down there, and you're doing nothing? They're burning people down there, and you're doing nothing?
But the day wasn't over. That night, Gilliam took his print to the California Institute for the Arts, where he'd also been invited for a show and tell, and this one came off.
So we went up to the projection booth with Terry and got the film, and I was informed at that point that the lawyers only wanted to, they were exchanging words back and forth all afternoon, and the only thing that could be shown was a clip from the film, which I think was referenced as a audio-visual aid, for a classroom. And so with that in mind, I took the film and drove back up to Cal Arts and met with the teacher of the class that we were going to show it for. And Terry arrived about 15 minutes after I got there, maybe a half hour, and we all met and decided to show a film clip, roughly the entire length of the film.
It was like the Black Hole of Calcutta. It was this very small screening room, not enough room. People were piled up. They were in the aisles. They were on desks. They were everywhere. And we showed it. And there were so many, they had to show it again later for the rest of the people. And it was great. It was really, it was for a brief moment, we were part of some kind of revolutionary activity. There was a lot of flag waving and chanting and marching, feeling we'd done something.
They couldn't breathe. The air conditioning broke. It was really hot and nasty inside there, so it wasn't really the most ideal situation. But from what I later heard, the quality of the projection and the sound was better than the screening that took place the next day for the critics.
The film got seen by a few more people. And just little by little, this sense that there was a really good or interesting film here that needed help. And despite this embargo on showing the film anywhere, a whole series of clandestine screenings were set up for the LA film critics. And I don't know how many of them there were, but there seemed to be enough for the majority of the critics to have seen the film by the time it came to vote for their awards for the year. And that, to me, was, again, one of the great moments. I mean, everything about this was wondrous because we were getting away with murder. We were doing things that you're not supposed to be able to do. People were standing up that don't normally stand up. Sid Sheinberg was living in fear that, the floodgates were going to open and artistry and creativity would be allowed loose on the streets of Hollywood.
The last bit of strategy from Terry and Arnon was to show the American version of Brazil to members of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association on the hope that they would rally to the cause. And on Saturday, December 14th, in a back room of the Beverly Hills Gun Club, they did.
It was an odd venue to begin with. I forget where we would traditionally meet, but we had never met in a gun club before. I don't know what the symbolism is or why we ended up there, but there we were in this kind of ante-room to the gun club. It was not, maybe it was an awards room or something. There was no, no gunplay in the vicinity. And I don't know that anyone really, it almost seems to me almost like it was like a popular movement. I don't know that there was any great plan that anybody had really carefully plotted out what was going to happen. But I think there was just a feeling in the group that this was the best film that people had seen. And I think, in general, critics really, one of the drives that drive critics is to try and accomplish something, to bring recognition to good films, to alert audiences to something that's really good, to somehow make a difference. I think, people often think of critics as being negative, but in fact what draws most people to criticism is the desire to spread the good news, to let people know that something of quality is out there. And I think that's what motivated people. People saw the opportunity to really alert the world to the fact that there was this good film and also possibly pressure Universal to bring it out. But again, people are not that naive. I don't think anybody thought it was a sure thing that this was Universal was going to do anything. People just wanted to make a statement that this was a good film, and they couldn't think of a better film in the year.
I was in that meeting too, and remember the brief debate over whether Brazil, which we were told wouldn't be released that year, and never in that form, could be considered for awards. We checked our bylaws and discovered that there was no reason it couldn't. When the day had ended, Brazil had beaten Prizzi's Honor for Best Screenplay by a margin of 2-1. Gilliam won Best Director over Rand's Akira Kurosawa by nearly 3-1. And in a runoff vote for Best Picture, it was Brazil over Prizzi's Honor, 17-6.
In my typical way, I just didn't want to know. I wanted to get a night's sleep, because if we had lost and been completely ignored, it'd be so depressing I wouldn't sleep. And if we'd won something, I don't know. I didn't know, so I went to bed and woke up in the morning, and there was the truth revealed.
Terry, it's Steve. When you hear this, wow, first, wow, hold your hand, hold your pants. And LA Critics Circle Award. Best Picture, Brazil. Best Director, Terry Gilliam. Best Screenplay, Brazil. Are you fucking, can you imagine that? I just got a call from Jack Matthews. I know it's about, I don't know, what, it's 5 o'clock here, so it's got to be 8 hours difference in the 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, but Terry, Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. God damn, I'm going to call on now, but I called you. I can't fucking believe it. Please get to the phone somehow and just at least hear that. Wow, congratulations. I'll call Milchon now. I'll talk to you later, I hope. Bye.
It's so perfect. There is a God. Clearly, there's a God of symmetry somewhere in the world. Irony and symmetry are the two things that seem to have come together.
2 days after the critics' voting, Universal announced that the American version of Brazil would be opened in theaters in Los Angeles and New York before the end of the year.
Winning the LA Critics, it became something that people went to see where they wouldn't normally go to see in that numbers. I think the picture did somewhere between $5 and $10 million, and I think it would have done 1 or 2. So there was this whole bonus because of the publicity. I think that the publicity gave the picture a certain cachet that it never would have had.
I saw that as kind of aberrational. I think the LA film critics, that given the controversy surrounding what had gone on, that it seemed, one of those things that that group of people decided to do to embarrass the studio or whatever. So I felt that that wouldn't have any long-term influence, but it would help us in the short term for opening the movie.
I thought that. I thought the whole thing was a tempest in a teapot. I didn't realize, that eventually the LA critics would give it their award, and I think the award had to do with getting behind the little man who was being bullied by the giant. And I think that I really don't think the LA critics liked it that much. I think they were just taking a position.
I still think that it's the best moment in the history of that organization, either before or since. I believe that what we wanted to do was what we did do, and there was a sense of it in the room that day, that we were going to do a tangible piece of good, a good work in terms of what critics do.
The backlash followed the victory in record time. Within days, the New York critics ignored Brazil in their voting, which Universal executives interpreted as proof of the LA group's grandstanding.
Every film I do seems to get incredibly mixed reviews, and this one must have been worse because there was such a build-up amongst the critics and everybody, an expectation of something so extraordinary that the fight was worth the fight. And what was interesting is the number of critics who obviously didn't like the film immediately said, well, the studio should have done what the studio should have done. The studio backed down, and yet that's what, to me, was the big shock, the speed with which they shifted from the filmmaker to the studio being right, because they didn't like the film. Now that's a leap that is one doesn't necessarily follow the other, and then you begin to think, well, these people are really, we know where their hearts really lie. And it was, Variety in particular was pretty nasty. They didn't like it, and they felt that the studio should have really got in there and got the scissors in there. And what nobody ever talked about was the fact that the studio was trying to change the film, change the nature of the film. It's one thing to say it's too long. It's another thing to say, let's go with the studio's idea of what the film should be. And I found that was shocking.
Until the studio's cut was released for television syndication, no one really knew how far Gilliam and Sheinberg were apart. As I said before, you can see for yourself. That version's here. It is 41 minutes shorter. It's absent most of the fantasy sequences, and it ends not with the heroine's death and the hero's lobotomy, but with the couple living happily ever after in Happy Valley.
The only director's cut that doesn't have the proper credit on is the Sid Sheinberg director's cut, which eventually got out on television. People thought I'd be shocked, and I was delighted because it's a chance for people to see what they intended to make. And this film is floating out there, but it's nice to have that much evidence out there that often, because I think it's all the time on syndicated television. So there's probably people growing up thinking that's Brazil, but luckily they've got the Voyager, Criterion Collection, Laserdisc to prove what it really is.
Though Terry returned to Universal to make the hit 12 Monkeys in 1995, while Sid was still the CEO of MCA Universal, the two have not spoken since the fight. The question that Sid raised during the battle, whose position is most damaging to the industry, still draws strong responses today.
I certainly believe strongly in having an atmosphere at a studio that encourages talent. Those are the assets in the business, so you want to bring the best people in and get them to do pictures that you would like them to do. And if you have a reputation for fights like that with the talent, it doesn't sound like a warm, loving place.
It kind of became a us against them, and naturally certain people in the press would jump in on Terry's side, weigh in on the director's side, which is normal, and so it became us against them, which I don't think you needed to do. It didn't help the picture. It didn't help the studio. It doesn't help the image of the studio. Actually, Universal was a very, friendly place to filmmakers. It was a place where you got enormous creative freedom, and has, under every regime there, it's always been known for that, more so than most studios. And I've worked at almost all of them. I know, the operation at all the studios. Universal gave an enormous amount of creative freedom, so that was unusual.
The only bad ending to a story like this would be if somebody had done something to destroy the film, let's say there was no long version. All right, the only version in existence was the 90-minute one you mentioned. Now, that, I think, would have been, say, a terrible outcome.
I think it was fantastic for the industry. I think the industry is, you mean I think that the fact that you could fight the studio and win for the right reason was great. I think that recognizing that the directors have the right to protect their work within, if they're reasonable, and Terry was reasonable, it was wonderful. And I think that certain movies that were a part of the movie, let's say the ending, if the ending of the movie is all the movie is what it is about, you cannot translate a technical language and tear an artwork apart.
The nicest thing about getting Brazil out was being out in LA and getting phone calls from writers or directors who said, that the fact that we won that little battle and got the film out got them to carry on a little bit longer, got them to fight a little bit harder for their cut. It didn't change the world, but if it just made a couple other films get through the system intact, or the way a single voice wanted them to be, it's done its job. It's good.
Whether the controversy helped or hurt its box office potential, Brazil proved Sheinberg, Antonowski, and Price right in one regard. Its appeal was limited to people with discriminating tastes. With all the revenue streams exhausted, Brazil barely returned Universal's investment. But the studio now has in its library a classic of modern filmmaking, a movie whose stylistic breakthroughs have influenced a generation of young filmmakers. Gilliam says he sees lots of problems with Brazil he didn't see 10 years ago, but wouldn't change a thing.
I like making films that are at least honest representations of what the guy going around calling himself Terry Gilliam is at that particular moment, and what he's reacting to, and what he's capable of doing. That's what a film is. They're very selfish landmarks. They're mementos of a life gone terribly wrong. and I don't want to change it. When people go back and want to fix it, there's a side of me that wants, but I won't do that, because there it is with all of its flaws and all of its good things. It's the product of a specific moment. It's like, and that's why it's like going into a museum and looking at paintings. Painters change, but at a specific point, there's that, and That's the only honest thing you can say, and that's the best you can do. It's, you know, the thing you feel at that moment, and that's it.